Everyone. My name is Asha Kaushal, and I'm the Associate Dean Research and International here at Allard Law. I also want to acknowledge that we have a number of people online. I think I can't always see them. Before we begin today's program, I want to acknowledge that we're on the UBC campuses at Point Grey and Robson Square, and those are situated on the ancestral and unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people. And I'd also like to acknowledge those on Zoom who are joining from other places near and far, and acknowledge the traditional owners and caretakers of their lands. A couple of housekeeping items. If you're attending virtually and experience any technical difficulties, please use the Zoom chat feature. This is run as a webinar. At the end, and I should say one more thing about that. Please direct your question to the host, not to everybody in the chat function. We'll have a short Q&A following this lecture. If you're attending virtually and you have a question for Ori, please do put it into the Q&A box as opposed to the chat box. Those are two different features. This event is co-hosted by the Allard School of Law and the Canadian Friends of the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. Today's speaker is Professor Ori Herstein, and he joins us as the 2005 and 2006 participant from the Morley Kaufman QC Memorial Allard School of Law, UBC, and Hebrew University Law Faculty Professor Exchange Program, which has been running for a few years now. The Allard School of Law is delighted to participate in this important exchange, which fosters transnational scholarly relationships and knowledge exchange, while providing a chance for faculty members to embed themselves in both the faculty and the country that they visit. It was originally established in 2010 by a committed group of donors. From 2013 to 2019, the program was named in honor of Mitchell Groper QC to recognize Mitch's ongoing commitment and leadership within the Jewish and legal communities. In the spring of 2020, thanks to a very generous gift from the Kaufman Family Foundation, the program was renamed to honor and celebrate the contributions and achievements of the late Morley Kaufman, QC, who was instrumental in the success of this exchange. I'd like to acknowledge and thank all the other program donors, the Canadian Friends of the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, for their involvement in ensuring the establishment and continuation of this exchange over time. You're giving me a quizzical look. Am I echoing?
There's a little echo, but I'm not sure if there's.
Sorry about that. The echo? It's now my pleasure. Well, I'll say one more thing. I keep getting ahead of myself here. After this lunch and the talk by Professor Herstein, there is coffee and dessert and tea upstairs in the terrace lounge to allow for some questions and answers and discussion around his paper and his visit here to Vancouver and to Allard Law. It is now my pleasure to introduce Professor Ori Herstein, who holds the Montesquieu Chair for Comparative Law and Legal History and serves as the Vice Dean for Curriculum at the Faculty of Law of the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. He also holds the position of Honorary Visiting Professor at the Law School of King's College London, where he was a permanent member of the faculty for over a decade. He teaches and writes on rights theory, tort law, private law theory, the philosophy of procedure, and legal and moral philosophy, writ large. He's the incoming co-editor-in-chief of the journal Law and Philosophy, and is scheduled to spend a year as a fellow of the Berlin Institute for Advanced Study. His publications have appeared in many renowned journals, including the Oxford Journal of Legal Studies, Legal Theory, Law and Philosophy, and the University of Toronto Law Journal. Please join me in welcoming Professor Ori Herstein.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. So there's a handout floating around. I don't have any slides, so I feel I have more control with a handout. So I'll try and structure the talk based on the handout. I'll refer you to numbers. Hopefully it's not too long. Before then, thanks to everyone at UBC who have been very welcoming, very nice. especially to Fiona, Michelle, Louise, and Asha, who've done a lot to organize and welcome me. Thanks to the Canadian Friends of the Hebrew University for funding the program. And I'm really happy to be here. So the paper, Taking Poetic Justice Seriously. The main idea here is to take the apparatus of, let's call it ethical theory, moral theory that's devoted to the idea of justice and apply it to this phenomenon called poetic justice, which hasn't really happened, which is kind of interesting. It seems that while poetic justice is an idea that's taken seriously, has attracted attention in literary theory, in religious theory, even in narrative theory, to an extent in epistemology. Somehow when it comes to the moral or ethical realm, it's not taken seriously. It seems something that people rather dismiss or ignore. So the idea is to take the apparatus of justice as it's explored in analytic jurisprudence, analytic political and ethical philosophy, and apply it to the idea of poetic justice and see what comes out. The work's a work in progress, something I'm thinking about now. I thought this would be of the things I'm working on. This would be kind of on the lighter, more accessible side of things. I don't know if that really worked out at the end. But it's not supposed to be too much heavy-duty analytical work, although I feel that's what happened at the end. Okay, the paper has two main questions. One is to ask whether or not poetic justice is indeed just, okay? Is poetic justice a subcategory of the moral category of justice, or is just a figure of speech, something not to be taken seriously as a moral matter? Second question is, if poetic justice is indeed justice, why is it poetic? Okay. Now, the two questions are really distinct questions, although I think in answering the first, we get some resources in order to answer the second. So given that poetic justice really is a form of justice in some sense, that helps understand why it's poetic. That's how the two parts connect. Okay, that was the introduction. Now I'm at section 2 in the handout. What is poetic justice? So what are we talking about? So it seems to me there are at least 3 uses of the term. And I'm interested in only one of them. So one use that you find is this to refer to legal kind of reflections or meditations or exploration of the idea or concept of justice in literary form. There's a lot to learn from literature about various ideas and experiences, and justice is just one of them. So examples would be The Merchant of Venice, which will come up later in another context, crime and punishment, okay? I'm not interested in this category of poetic justice. The second use is just to refer to to literary narratives that incorporate kind of just resolution as part of the narrative or part of the story. Well, the story itself is just, it's very familiar. Like, so the villain gets what they deserve at the end. Example, Macbeth. There will be, I tried to put a lot of Shakespeare into this talk. I'm not interested in this category either. And then there's the third, the one which I am interested in. This is 2.3 on the handout, and we have kind of this is a working definition, such as it is. So poetic justice is justice that results serendipitously in a way, I mean casually, the casual story that brings about that just state of affairs. There's something about it that's aesthetically pleasing. So we have a just state of affairs, we have a causal story, and then the causal story somehow pleases us, is attractive, or whatever word you want to use for poetic or aesthetic. There's not much of aesthetic theory going on here, so we'll just more or less assume that we understand something about things being attractive or pretty or pleasing. We're in that realm, and I'm not going to do much work to and take that apart more specifically. We'll leave that to philosophy of aesthetics. Okay. Now, so we have a definition, sort of, no examples. Seems to me, and I'm open to revisions, that there are kind of two types of categories of poetic justice that fall under the definition. One I call, or not I call, people call cosmic justice, or we can say use natural justice or divine justice, or sometimes it's just some third party who unwittingly, without knowing, without intending, without realizing, mistakenly, just brings about a just state of affairs. Examples. We have a bunch of them. This is 2311. So one that Aristotle kind of gives briefly in the Poetics is the example of King Midas. I think that's the right pronunciation. This is not the guy who turns stuff into gold. It's another guy. It's Midas. Someone kills King Midas, and a little while later, there's the statue in the image of the late king that just somehow unexplainably falls and crushes the murderer. You say, oh, okay, he deserved this. He deserves some measure of punishment. But there's something in this story where it's the statue in the image of the late king, which he murdered, it's what kind of delivers the blow that seems poetic. There's a story there. There's something about it that looks like poetic justice. That's one example. Another example, here's a really legal one. This is discharge for value defense, which is an equitable doctrine. If anybody knows this. So if a bank transfers a bunch of money to a person that the client of the bank owes money to, then there's this doctrine that says, even though it was a mistake, no one intended to transfer the money. If the money was owed, or money, not the money, but money was owed to the party that received it unintentionally, they can keep it as this payment of the debt, right? And this seems to be kind of a case of poetic corrective justice, where it sort of happens on the law in some places. This is a contested doctrine, but recognizes that they can keep the money because it's just they are owed the money. I have a bunch of other examples. I don't know if you want to get into them. And I think that's enough, right? Or do we do more if you like? Okay. So we had one example of poetic corrective justice, another example of poetic retributive justice under the category of cosmic justice. And then now let's move to the second category of poetic justice, which I coined as hoist with his own petard. That's Hamlet. So what does that mean? Basically, the idea that the person who deserves something does something that not only makes them deserving of the thing they get, it also makes sure that they get it. I don't know if that was clear. So here are two examples. So back to the Merchant of Venice. There, Shylock kind of triggers this legal trial wherein he is quite strict in his legal approach and interpretation, right? He demands a pound of flesh from Antonio as stipulated in the contract, and he's unwilling to waver or move on that point. And people say to him, look, maybe we can come up with something that's a little more humane or introduce a measure of mercy or something else than extracting a pound of flesh, because if you extract a pound of flesh from someone, they die. Okay? He is unwavering, and then the whole thing is turned around, right? So Portia comes in and says, wait a minute, I could play this strict lawyerly game just as well as you. I mean, if this is the game you want to play, I'll point out to you that while you may get your pound of flesh, what that means is your literal right. The law means that murder, something along the lines of that, and he ends up quite badly, right? So he introduces this legal process, which then turns around on him, and he's the victim of it. Here's another example. This is a random English case, Keating and Harrell. Okay, so here there's a person who attacks someone else on racial grounds, or whatever. And someone steps in and there's a rumble and they start fighting, and then both of them fall to the ground, roll down a hill, roll into the road. Someone drives accidentally and runs them over. Both of them are injured. Now, in this case, the driver was negligent. There was a basis for this lawsuit. While the one person, the person who stepped in, gets full compensation, the person who is the attacker, who instigated this whole thing, gets half under contributory negligence. But an interpretation of what's going on here is not that this was a foreseen outcome of what he did, and therefore he was negligent in relation to being run over, a bunch of here's the court figures, you kind of got what you deserve, and you caused it. Okay, so is that clear, or another example is needed? Get the category? Yes. Okay. Category, section 3. Okay, so we know what poetic justice is, more or less. What is justice? Okay, big question. So we're in the realm of morality. Justice is a moral category, but it's not all of morality. It's a moral category that's about allocation. What is the moral allocation of stuff between people? Often falls under the category of justice. Now we can allocate all sorts of stuff. The approach is very general, tends to be. So it's not only goods and services and resources. It's also the more kind of vague stuff like risk and liberty and security and rights. So we're distributing a whole lot of stuff, justly or unjustly. Now I need to say a little more. So if justice is about moral allocation, clearly not all moral allocation has to do with justice. So we need to say a little more to qualify what justice is about. And one way of doing it, and this is on section 4, is justice is about getting the allocation that one is due. We often see that formulation. What is it that makes the allocation just? It has something to do with the person and what is due to them. So here are a few quotes. So Justinian, that goes way back, so it's good. Justice is the set of constant purpose which gives right, sorry, I'll try that again. It's because of Toby.
I knew it. I knew the joke was.
Inside. Toby used to make fun of my reading, and
Yeah.
I'm gonna try again, very self-conscious.
So unfair when you hear that.
Justice is the set and constant purpose which gives to every man his due. Aristotle. All are agreed that justice and distributions must be based on desert of some sort. Well, here is a quote by David Miller. David Miller is a very important contemporary, sort of contemporary philosopher, quite influential. He'll be the main villain of the paper. So he says, justice means treating each person in the way that is appropriate to that person personally. The main idea seems to be the justice is a moral allocation that is based or grounded in properties of the specific subject of the allocation. It's about them. Something about them makes the distribution just. Right? It's not just any distribution that's moral. You can have distribution based on impersonal values. That's fine, based on social policy considerations. Those are moral distributive norms. However, they're not justice norms. Okay? That's a distinction. So again, we're in justice and under justice. It has something to do with the person who is the subject of the distribution. Something about them makes the distribution just. What about them makes the distribution just? So here I want to introduce yet another term, and here it may be getting a little heavy in distinction, so I'm sorry about that. But the term is desert. Okay? So let's understand this idea of person being due something in terms of what they deserve, which is often done when we're talking about explaining the grounds of justice. Now, do and desert are kind of near each other, but maybe there's still a distinction here that can help out. In any case, most of the literature has articulated the idea of desert, so we can work with that a little bit. And so the idea of desert is that it is valuable that people get that which is fitting their conduct or virtue. Something about this person has to do something semi-active, right? That makes them deserving of things. So this rules out from desert, for example, need. I don't deserve something because I need it. It may be right to give it to me. I may have a right for it. It may be the good thing to do, but I don't deserve it. I don't do anything for it. There's nothing about me in the sense that somehow active that makes me deserving. Same for human rights. So human rights are rights that every human has by the virtue of being human. They're not deserved in any interesting way. They just have that. Okay. Institutional entitlements. For example, when I came here, Fiona told me that I deserve an office. I don't really deserve the office. The rules of the institution are such that a visitor gets an office, which is really nice, by the way. An office is great. But I don't deserve it. Okay? I get it under some, I can claim it under some institutional rule. I can complain if I didn't get it, but I don't deserve it in any serious, interesting sense. Okay, so hopefully you see the distinction what desert adds to an analysis of justice. 521 on the handout. Joel Feinberg. So Joel Feinberg's, I think, was a wonderful philosopher with distinctions, really clear and pristine. Anyway, he has a famous article on desert, and he has these classification where he says desert is about, we have a subject of desert, an object of desert, and the basis of desert. The subject is who deserves the allocation. The object is what they deserve. And the basis of desert, which is the category that's interesting for us, is why they deserve it. Right? What's the explanation of them deserving? And it could be various things. In 522, I just suggest responsibility or personal responsibility is something people often talk about. It makes us deserving. If I'm responsible for something, that makes me deserving of maybe liability, culpability, some good stuff too. If I'm responsible for something good, I deserve praise and so on. Okay, but we can put this already getting, I think, to be a little too much. 5.3. So there are different principles, let's call them, of justice, and just to point out how desert fits them quite well. Okay. So if we are in the business of explaining justice in terms of desert, here is just a very cursory kind of demonstration how it works and different principles of justice. So retributive justice. Person does wrong, they deserve some kind of retribution. Fits. Right? And they deserve it because something about them makes them deserving. Corrective justice. So a person wrongfully by someone else, they are deserving of some sort of compensation, and more so fitting even is the person who does the harming deserves liability. You're not doing anyone a favor by compensating. Distributive justice. This is the more controversial one for desert. At least to some extent, we think that people deserve distributions because of what they deserve, right? So the things they did, they're responsible for. You deserve good or bad things in terms of allocation, higher salary, lower salary, stuff like that. Clearly, not all distribution depends on desert. Not all just distribution depends on desert, but I think some does. Okay, so desert fits okay with explaining justice. Say more about that in a minute. What I want to do is explain poetic justice, the justice bit about it in terms of desert. I think that's quite a natural category to explain the justice in poetic justice, right? No, we're not doing social justice here. We're doing something that's very much individualistic, very much based on people's actions and so on. Desert seems to be a good way of explaining what's going on in poetic justice, even if it doesn't explain the entirety of justice, which I don't necessarily think it does. Okay. Okay. So I think it fits the challenge. Now I'm on 6 in the handout. Some people don't like desert when it comes to justice. And they deserve maybe a nod of the hat. And also, it will maybe be a little helpful to explain why this doesn't really pose much of a threat for this specific context, the context of poetic justice. So I would say, since roles, and this is a very broad statement, philosophical, theoretical literature on justice has been preoccupied, primarily concerned with just societies, just institutions, just basic principles for society, right? Things are rather grand that have to do with how to design a just state, just world, even if you're talking about global justice. And they're quite dismissive, skeptical about desert helping them in this endeavor of explaining justice. Okay? And justice has kind of fallen from grace in recent decades, a lot due to roles. So there's a ton of literature on justice after roles, but nothing on poetic justice. And I think that has something to do with this kind of approach. But the thing is that poetic justice is not institutional by definition, an ad hoc sort of thing. Right? It's not reproducible, not an element of policy. This has nothing to do with this kind of social enterprise under the category of justice. So the fact that desert is very individualistic, it's very vague, it's very moralistic, right? Something not very modern or sophisticated about it. It echoes the past. It's unmeasurable. It's not the stuff you do policy with, but that doesn't really matter for poetic justice, because poetic justice is not about institutions, policy, or anything like that. So we're fine with desert. Another Rawlsian criticism of desert in the context of justice is that desert is in some sense unfair. So basically our achievements are really socially determined or naturally determined, and they're not really earned. You deserve something because I did something. No, it wasn't you. It was your upbringing. It was your resources were available to you, or luck in your natural endowments, right? Your DNA and so on. But that's not you. That's luck. And therefore, why distribute things based on luck rather than based on some ethical concept? Which is fair enough. But now, of course, this is highly contested. Right? Are we entirely determined? There's no reason to go really deeply into this. But I will say that this mainly has to do with distribution of goods and resources and things like that. If somebody punches me in the face, I don't know how far they can go with this defense saying, I don't deserve anything in return because of, I don't know, my natural endowments or intelligence. It just seems to be rather weak in some cases of distribution. But there's this argument that challenges desert in some contexts. Okay? Anyway, to conclude, when it comes to poetic justice, these kind of detractions from desert as a basis of justice are not really, I think, overwhelmingly compelling, at least for our context. 7. So this should read poetic justice detractors, not deserts. That's a mistake in the handout. Okay, so there are people in the justice literature who outright claim that things like poetic justice are not justice. Should not be taken seriously in my terminology. They're not a real moral term. It's more in the realm of figure of speech. And this has to do with the absence of an agent doing the distribution. There's this demand that the party who is doing the distribution, be a just distribution or unjust distribution, ought to be an agent. Right? There needs to be somebody there. And if there isn't somebody there, it's not a matter of justice anymore, it's something else. Two quotes. So back to David Miller, who's an Oxford guy and wrote a lot about, I think, the ethics of immigration lately. I don't know if you know. Anyway, he's a mildly big deal, I think. Okay, so he says in the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, no less, which is the point of reference for contemporary philosophy. So anybody wants to read something about justice goes to the entry on justice and sees what David Miller has written about it. And what has he written? Justice requires an agent whose will alters the circumstances of its object. So we cannot, except metaphorically, describe as just state of affairs that no agent has contributed to bring about. Okay? So you have to have a distributing agent for justice to even be relevant to the story. Well, here's a quote from Hayek. It has, of course, to be admitted that the distribution of material goods would in many instances have to be regarded as very unjust if it were the result of deliberative allocation. But it is not the case. Those shares are the outcome of a process, assuming the market, neither intended nor foreseen by anyone. To demand justice for such a process is clearly absurd. So they think you need an agent doing the distributing in order for justice to be even relevant in that circumstance. Why? Why do you think so? Justice is often, rightly, thought of as a norm, as something that's reason giving, something that's action guiding, something that we use in order to assess actions, something that has to do, in other words, with agents. Okay? It's a moral norm that directs us as to how to act, generally speaking. So here's a quote from Mill. This is 731. So Mill writes, justice implies something which it is not only right to do, notice it's about action, and wrong not to do, but which some individual person can claim from us as his moral right. Okay? Something that we have to do. In other words, give him whatever he justly has coming to him. Okay? In other words, justice is in the tradition generally thought of, or as at least recently mostly thought of as reason giving, as a norm, as something that has to do with agents and actions. And poetic justice doesn't. Why not? Well, the whole point was no agent is involved, right? It's either something that happens as a matter of luck, unwittingly, without intention, without awareness, without desire, and so on. It's kind of by accident. So the distributor is maybe a person, but they're not acting as an agent while distributing. It just kind of happens. Or if we're in the category of cosmic justice, well, that clearly has nothing to do with anyone. Right? If the statue falls on someone's head, well, I don't know who did that, but no agent. Okay, it just kind of happened. So if justice is tied with normativity in terms of reason giving, reason guiding, assessing actions, and so on, then almost by definition, it seems that poetic justice ain't justice. Oh, so the conclusion in my terminology is we do not take poetic justice seriously as a moral category. Okay. Everybody's with me? Okay. Number 8 on the handout. 3 responses to this challenge of taking poetic justice seriously. The first 2 accept the framework of talking about justice as a norm, as reason giving, but argue that within that framework, we can still make sense of poetic justice as an instance of justice. The third objection, which is the more interesting, I think, more compelling one, is to reject the framework and say, well, you're wrong, justice is not exclusively in this way about agents. The picture of justice is more complicated. Okay? Response number one, poetic justice is normative. It does give reasons to agents, and you just got it wrong. How does this work? So norms guide and give reasons, but they don't only give reasons for action. At least that's the story. There's the normativity of beliefs. There's the normativity of emotions, reaction. Things that are not actions. And in this respect, poetic justice gives us plenty of reasons. So if something happens and it's just, it's pleasing, I think it's the right thing to do, I have reasons to form certain judgments about what happened. I don't have any reasons to act, right? But it does guide us in some respect. Now, this whole world of reasons to believe and reasons for emotions, that's a whole giant discussion. So you just have to kind of take it on that there's such a thing. And if you accept that indeed there are such reasons, then poetic justice involves them. It is normative, and therefore it can count as a norm, and therefore it can count as genuine justice. Now, this is not, I think, super satisfying as a response. At the end of the day, what matters to people who are detractors of poetic justice, who focus on agency and justice is a necessary condition for it, are at the end of the day interested in actions. Just actions, right? That's what it's really about. I'd probably be willing to concede the point then that when, I don't know, the market distributes something in a certain way, Hayek will be certainly happy to say that he finds it pleasing or right as an idea. That's fine with him, but don't mess with it in terms of justice. That's what he's really thinking about. It's far mostly practical rather than has to do with theoretical reasons or emotional reasons. Okay, well, that was response number one. It's not my response. There's a little footnote, but it's worth mentioning. I think there's something to it. Response number two. Poetic justice does involve agency in the allocation. Right? You're wrong. Right? When someone distributes something accidentally, for example, if I attack someone and unwittingly fall, trip, roll down the road and get run over, my agency is still there. An expansive conception of agency. I'm acting as an agent when I do that in some sense. What does this mean? Well, there's all this literature that has to do with being responsible for action results that are unwitting, unintended, and so on. This is not unheard of, right? Mainly we find it in the literature on negligence. So when you're negligent, you do something unwittingly, unintentionally, by accident, didn't mean to, and then there's a question, are you really morally responsible or not? And there are different camps on this question, but there's certainly a camp that says, yes, you are, right? We can blame you, we can ascribe liability to you as a matter of justice, as a matter of desert, and so on. There is that camp that says agency is involved sometimes in unwitting conduct. So there's a whole literature on this stuff. If you buy into this literature on responsibility and unwitting conduct, I see no reason why you can't fit it into cases of poetic justice and explain why there is agency in some of those cases. Now, this, of course, is unhelpful for cosmic justice because then nobody is there. Right? There's not anybody who's negligently doing something good, negligently distributing things justly, something like that. because it's the wind or God or the earthquake or whatever. So this is, to the extent it's a response, it's a partial response only. So for Hayek, it's the market, for example, that does the distribution, and there's no agency as such to which we can attach this kind of theory of responsibility for mistakes or accidents or things we do well but don't mean to, and so on. Okay? So again, a partial response. Section 10, response number 2. Justice as a value. So here we're expanding our understanding of justice, or explaining why the kind of normative reason-based conception of justice is only part of the story. It's limited. It's actually tied necessarily to something else that has to do with justice. So we can view justice, A, as normative, reason giving, and so on, but we can also view it as a value. What do you mean by that? By that, I mean it's a feature of state of affairs, not of actions. When we make an evaluative judgment about something, this is beautiful, this is clever, this is unfortunate. We're making evaluative judgments that don't necessarily have anything to do with actions, right? We can apply value judgments to things that are not agential in a sense. Is that a word, Hoy? I don't know. Agentic. Okay. So a just state of affairs is one in which one gets what one deserves, and that's valuable. I don't know how they got what they deserve, but there's a value there. They got what they deserve. That would be their approach. And an unjust state of affairs involves someone not getting what they are due, what they deserve, and there's a disvalue there in terms of justice. That seems to be a perfectly plausible way of talking about justice, but there's more to it. It's not just, I think, terminology. There is a relationship, before the relation, this is 10.3 on the handout. There is first an independence between justice as value and justice as reason. So here's going back to Aristotle. There will be things that are unjust, but not yet acts of injustice when no agent responsibility is involved. Right? The state of affairs is unjust, but nobody did anything yet that's unjust. And that's possible. Often that's what happens. Or here's Gerald Cohen, who's important for the move I'm about to make. Justice is, as Justinian said, so going back to Justinian, each person getting her due. The justice is her due, irrespective of the constraints that might make it impossible to give it to her. Okay? Same idea. The fact that somebody is due something has nothing to do with the fact of whether or not someone is able or did not give it to them. Sometimes they're not able to do it. But justice still seems to apply, at least as an evaluation. Now, there's not these two different ways of talking about justice, two different categories of justice. They're actually related. Okay? Justice comes as a value, comes before sense of justification, before just reasons of justice. It is the value of justice which grounds the reasons of justice. The reasons of justice, the norms of justice arise out of the fact that justice is a valuable thing, right? Just we ought to distribute things justly as such. No, there's something about it which is valuable and good, and that something that's valuable and good precedes the norm, precedes the directive, precedes the obligation. Okay? It grounds it. So this is 10.4.2. Wrote this down. Hopefully it'll be clear. If it is indeed true that you ought to bring about justice if you can, let's assume that. It seems implicit that the normative force of that conditional ought, in other words, if you can, do justice. But why ought I do justice if I can? Well, that depends on the underlying value of justice. So a state of affairs must be just or unjust, even if there is may be just or unjust, even if there is nothing anyone can do to bring it about, let alone if one could have done something about it, but didn't. And this relies strongly on Jerry Cohen's stuff, which had this sort of semi-vendetta, intellectual vendetta, not personal, against Rawls. He has this article, this important book, and how's the word? Saving Justice from Equality. I think that's the title, where he just goes after Rawls. And this has something to do with that. And he thinks Rawls is all about the norms of justice, but he's forgetting value. And that's important. You can read Jerry Cohen to figure out why. Okay. Is the point clear? So let's go back or return to poetic justice. Poetic justice is a just state of affairs. It exhibits the value of justice, and the absence of an agent distributor does not affect that status. It is still justice. So in this sense, we ought to take poetic justice seriously as a moral term, category. Okay, now to the poeticism. No, I'm talking a lot, right?
Well, no, but if we can wrap up in about 5 minutes, just for questions.
Okay, I'll go really quickly. This is the fun stuff. This is poeticism stuff. Okay. Accepting is just, okay? What is poetic then about poetic justice? This is 11. And my explanation is something I call the value causal nexus. Sounds good, right? Right, so clearly not all states of affairs are also poetic. So how do we make the distinction? How do we tease out the poetic bit about these cases? So let's start with Hoist with his own petard cases. B deserves a measure of harm on account of assaulting and injuring A. Subsequently, B suffers such harm. The only difference between the two cases is the causal story by which the harm comes to pass. Case 1. While assaulting A, B's own actions cause him to accidentally trip and fall, so kind of injures himself. B is found, in case 2, B is found criminally guilty for assaulting and goes to prison. That sounds a standard criminal law case. In both cases, B gets what he deserves, and thus justice is served. Specifically, in this case, retributive justice. It's only case 1, and this is the point, is an instance of poetic justice, and we want to know why. What's the difference? What makes it poetic? It has something to do with what Feinberg calls, if you recall, the basis of the deserve. The facts about the deserving party that makes him deserving of something. The justification for the distribution. What happens in case 1, the Hoist with own petard case, is that the basis of desert is a direct or near cause of the deserving party getting what she deserves. Okay? Facts justifying distribution and facts causing it are the same fact. So we have this kind of unit where I do something, it makes me deserving of a certain distribution, in this case, some kind of negative distribution, lack of liberty or harm, and I get it all in one neat causal unit. See that? Nothing else happens. I do it, by doing it, I generate the fact that I deserve something, and I get what I deserve all in one little bit of causal kind of story, scenario. Okay. So that's the value causal nexus. Let's look at cosmic justice. B deserves harm on account of assaulting, this is 11.3. Assaulting and injuring A. Subsequently, B suffers such harm. The only difference between the two cases is the causal story by which the harm comes to pass. This is based on the Midas case, Midas case. Gust of wind causes a statue in the image of A to fall on B. In case 4, a gust of wind causes an avalanche, which injures B. In both cases, B gets what he deserves, justice is served. Only case 3 is an instance of poetic justice, and the question is why? What's the difference between 2? In case 3, we do not have, strictly speaking, a nexus of value and causation, right? The statue might have fallen on B regardless of his wrongdoing, he may not have killed him and still have been crushed by his statue. The two are very remote causally. The murder, what makes him deserving of punishment, and the causal story by which he received his just desert, the falling of the statue. Right? But what do we have? So we have something that I would like to call a narrative nexus between justice making facts and justice causing facts. Right? Here it's about us. There's a kind of explanation. We have all these things happening in the world and we connect them by certain explanations. And in this case, we find an explanation that's rooted in our patterns of thinking of justice, where we connect these two events, murder and a falling statue. And we see something there that seems to be connected. It's as if it fell because or for the desert, for the murder. It is us who bring them together through narrative structure, and therefore I call it the narrative nexus between justice making facts and justice causing facts. So it's kind of a story we tell. Okay. It's more of an interpretation that can we impose on the facts. Okay? More or less, I think that's what's going on there. That's different from the regular case. But why is it poetic or aesthetically pleasing? Let's go to case 2 again. Institutional or agent-based justice. This is where the court sends someone to prison. What's going on in these types of cases? These are cases of standard practical reason. So you have a reason of justice, some kind of norm. He murdered somebody, ergo he deserves punishment. Then we have a practical agent. Practical agent is a deliberating agent, a rational agent, who looks at the reasons, and then by some miraculous process that only human beings are capable of doing, which is called practical reasoning and normative reasoning and so on, turns those reasons into fact. He turns them into results and causation. He acts. Right, so an action is this connection between the reason for the action and the actual action in the world. Okay? And that's what practical agents do. They align, and they do it well, fact and value. They bridge reason and causation. They do it through acting for a reason. In poetic justice, there's no such agent, right? There's no one bridging, aligning the normative reasons and the factual, natural facts, right? Reasons and causation. There's no one there doing this rational thinking, the practical reasoning work. It just happens. Right? It happens on its own. Seems that value, therefore, is kind of coded into the laws of nature. Justice just does not require agency, does not require institutions. It's just how it is. Right? And why is this poetic? Well, it kind of means the world, or it looks like, the world is naturally a just world, a just place, a good place. There's a natural moral order in the world, and that presumably is pleasing, is nice to see, is aesthetic or poetic. So here are a couple of quotes, and then I'll be done. One from Immanuel Kant. Virtue and happiness together constitute possession of the highest good in a person, and happiness distributed in exact proportion to morality as the worth of a person and its worthiness to be happy, which sounds a lot like dessert, constitutes the highest good of a possible world. That's the ideal world. Everybody gets the happiness they deserve. Leibniz, the law of justice, everyone is to participate in the perfection of the universe and to have personal happiness in proportion to his own virtue and to the extent that this will, has his contributed to the common good. I messed that up, sorry. Here's one from the Bible. For thy sow the wind, and thy shall reap the whirlwind. It has no stalk, no head, nor kernel. Okay? Consequences are kind of built into nature. It's part of the story. What goes around comes around. Yeah, you can keep going with this. This is a familiar idea. It's a pleasing idea, and we wish the world were like it. Now, 12.4, we know it's not like that, right? We know the world is not just. This is not the case. But in these instances of poetic justice, we kind of, I don't know, suspend disbelief unless we are believers. I mean, that's a different story. That allow this kind of experience. We see real justice taking place, and it's beautiful because it seems to happen on its own. It seems that the world is ordered. And even if we know it's not, we tell ourselves a little story that makes it seem like it is. And that, in that sense, we see why the first part of the paper, Poetic Justice Really Is Just, kind of helps us understand what about it is poetic. Okay. I have a last section called 13, Poetic Justice and the Law. This is very wild, unwieldy stuff, so I'll just stop. Thank you. If you have any questions, I'm happy to talk about them.
Thank you, Ari.